Hello, today I'm here with Stan Cho, MPP for Willowdale, who is also the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Finance. Thank you for joining us, Stan Cho.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so last week we got our fall economic statement for the Government of Ontario. It says we expect a lower deficit as well as the increased investment in healthcare and education. Those are not easy goals to balance out. How did you find the report in general?
It's a great question, and you're right. It's not easy to balance investing in programs and services while bringing down a deficit. And the deficit is bad. When we came into government, it's $15 billion. That's why we have a $360 billion debt. And in the world, Ontario has the highest debt of a sub-sovereign nation, state or province, anywhere. And we understand that that puts those programs and services at risk for the future. So we had to move very delicately in our plan, and we outlined a plan in the budget in 2019, and the fall economic statement was an update on that plan. And we're happy to say that we're actually ahead of schedule. We expected the deficit at this point in the year to come from $15 billion to $10.3. It's down to $9 billion. But the best part is that we've managed to invest $1.3 billion additionally into healthcare and into education. And in the history of Ontario, we have never invested this much money into healthcare or education ever before. Now, how do we do it? Well, we made sure that we kept our promise of improving conditions for business operators in Ontario to create jobs. And we reduced red tape, we reduced taxes for small business, and that's led to the creation of 250,000 jobs in a year and a half alone. And we understand that that is revenue to the province without increasing taxes to the hardworking people of Ontario. And that's just one example of many things we've done.
I'm glad that you mentioned the tax cut. According to the report, we can also expect some tax cuts for small business owners. Can you elaborate on the changes to the corporate income tax?
Sure, and I think to start with why we're doing this, it's not just about the job creation, because 98% of our economy here in Canada is based on small business. But I think to the story of my mom and dad, when they moved here almost 50 years ago, they couldn't get a job working in some big office tower, so they had to work in a convenience store. And that's the story of not just Korean Canadians, but many immigrants to this country. They work hard in these small businesses, and we have to make it easier for them to succeed, because oftentimes for immigrants, it's the only thing they can do. So we're lowering the small business tax rate by 8.7%, which is going to save business owners a lot of money next year, up to $1,500, which they can reinvest back into the businesses to create more jobs. But that's not it. We're also cutting a lot of red tape, the rules that don't make sense, that people get really frustrated about. And that's going to take $400 million in savings next year alone in compliance costs. And there's more we're doing for small business away from the tax. We're trying to modernize the alcohol rules and bring more choice and fairness to consumers, because some rules around alcohol have not been updated since prohibition in the 1920s. And we know that Ontarians should have the choice to buy their beer and wine in convenience stores. It's more revenue for the province. It's also more jobs out there supporting our local agricultures. Ontario has some of the best apples and grapes in the world. We should be showing this product off to everybody else. And so we're doing many things to help small business.
Great. Okay, so what are the backgrounds for the increased investment in healthcare and education? Because that's a little bit different from the initial movement of the Doug Ford government.
Yes, and so originally we wanted to make sure that we bring down the deficit while making sure that healthcare and education still had that quality that we expect in Ontario. And we need to make sure it's not just good today, but we need to make sure it's good for our kids and their kids down the road. So it's a bit of a balancing act. And so we decided we're going to invest additionally into healthcare and education of $1.3 billion. And so, as I said, historic investment in both levels, but more importantly, we have to look at the outcomes. For far too long, governments of all political stripes, whether you're Liberal or NDP or Conservative, they've only looked at the money being put into programs and services. That's not good enough. You should measure success also by the outcomes. Are they good for patients? Are they good for students? And that's why we're not only investing more into healthcare and education, we're looking at how those outcomes are measured. Is it best for the patient? Is it best for the student? And there's some great changes coming there. How do we find the additional money? Through other programs. It's not just through job creation, which is additional revenue for the province, but we need to do government smarter. And so we introduced something called the Smart Initiatives Program. And I'll give you one example of that. Right now, if you're hurt in, let's say, Aurelia in the north, and the ambulance shows up and they need to give you an intravenous drip, right, the thing that connects to the saline drip, and they realize, well, you're very hurt, so we have to take you to Toronto General. When the helicopter arrives, Orange Air Ambulance, they have to take the needle, perfectly good needle, out of your arm and put a new one in. Why? Because the helicopter, Orange Air Ambulance, purchases from a different government supplier than Aurelia Ambulance does. And when you get to Toronto General, they have to change that needle a third time for the same reason. That's triple the cost to the taxpayer, discomfort for the patient, and risk of infection as well. These are the things that don't make sense in government, and we're saying you should be buying from one source. This is how we're going to save billions for the taxpayer as well to put into healthcare and education.
On that note, the budget has increased, but the population in Ontario is also rapidly increasing. So would it be enough to cover the increasing number of Ontarians?
It's a great question. We also have an aging population. It's growing and aging, and so we're going to have further burdens on the healthcare system as well. And that's why we need to not just look at job creation, we also need to look at smart initiatives, like I just described, and there's many more examples of that. And we also need to measure based on outcomes. The government has not kept any data. And that's also a problem, because any large corporation out there realizes that information is hugely important, so you keep great records. We're changing the way we do government. We're bringing the language of business to the business of government, and we're making sure we have better record keeping, better measurement of outcomes, and sustainable changes that will be transformational, that will outlast governments. We realize we're not going to be in government forever, but we're putting in changes that will make sure the government is transparent and treats taxpayer money with respect and looks at outcomes, not just the dollars spent. And it's going to lead to a lot better outcomes.
Okay, so in your inaugural speech, you expressed your willingness to address climate change. So what kinds of steps are we currently taking to fight climate change?
And climate change is very real, and it's our generation's problem to fix. And, you know, I just believe that we don't have to tax everyone to help the environment. In fact, we know it doesn't work. If you look to the example of British Columbia, who introduced the carbon tax, gasoline right now in British Columbia is about $1.70 a liter. And we know that it's done nothing, the carbon tax, to help the environment. And all it's done is put up the cost of groceries and affect the single mom working 2 jobs to try and make ends meet. That's the person who's paying for it while not helping the environment. So our plan's different. Our plan says we don't want to punish the everyday hardworking Ontarian. People are paying enough out there as it is. We want to punish the biggest polluters. So our Made in Ontario Environment Plan says if you're a company and you pollute, you're going to pay for that pollution. It's very simple, and I think it's very fair. There's other things that we're doing. We're working on the Blue Box program. Did you know that right now when you recycle, most of the things aren't recyclable because every jurisdiction, whether it's Toronto, Hamilton, they have different rules around those blue boxes. So it's confusing. People don't know what can go into recycling bin or what doesn't, and that ends up in the landfill. So we're changing the rules around blue box to standardize it across jurisdictions to make it very clear what's recyclable and what's not. The other thing that we're doing is we're incentivizing green companies. You know, I was touring a supermarket yesterday, and they introduced me to this company that creates those single-use coffee cups, like Keurig or whatever, what have you. And they've made it's a Canadian company, they've made a completely 100% biodegradable coffee cup, because it's terrible for our environment, the plastic ones. But the frustrating part is, even though it's completely compostable, right now, if you put that container into the organics for compost, the jurisdictions here, the city has to throw it in the garbage. Why? Just because of the rules around that. And that's the red tape we're talking about. We need to get rid of those barriers to making a green economy happen. And it's a reality out there. And we need to incent companies like that to succeed. So we're going to change some of those red tape. We're going to make sure companies like that, because if they succeed, that's an immediate impact to our environment today, without having to punish the hardworking people of Ontario.
Okay, so what do you think the changed budget would influence the Korean-Canadian community?
In many ways, and I mentioned how Korean Canadians, they're some of the hardest working people out there. When I go to the gym every morning at 4:30, I see the Korean business owners are already at their stores, at their dry cleaners, already gone to the flower shop to stock their convenience stores. Those are the people that drive me forward, because that was my parents when they first moved to this country. And I have the opportunity to do what I do now thanks to my parents and that's a similar story for our second generation out there. So we're doing a lot. We're bringing down small business tax, as I mentioned. We're removing a lot of the red tape, the barriers to success. We're making our rules clearer. We're expanding public transit. We're building subways. We're bringing down the cost of living. We're working on the hydro rates. And the fall economic statement outlined some clear steps that we are taking in those priorities, and we're going to make it easier for our small business community to succeed. And these are just the tip of the iceberg. There's more announcements that'll be coming in the budget in 2020.
Okay. So this is the last question. Transit is a big issue in Ontario. So can we expect some improvements with the proposed Ontario line?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we'll see some drastic solutions. Better late than never. I was in Korea this summer and I was very jealous of the subway system. It's incredible. It's like a spider web. It connects the entire city. Toronto is the fourth largest city in North America, but our subway system looks like it's Seoul's from 1970, right? It's just a few simple lines. And that's because the city of Toronto kept fighting over the subway lines and it never got built. And so we are now at a historic moment because all three levels of government have agreed to our 4 priority projects. That includes the Ontario line. So there's 4 priority projects. We're extending Shepherd East, 3 stops into Scarborough. Eglinton West is being extended west of Mount Dennis and eventually will connect to the airport. Good news for Willowdale, we're expanding Yonge Street north to Richmond Hill to Highway 7. And probably the most important part is the Ontario line, which goes from Ontario Science Centre at Don Mills and Eglinton all the way down to Ontario Place, which is on the water near the exhibition place. And because the city doesn't have to pay for the Ontario line anymore, there's 3 levels of government, that's money that can be dedicated to other transit projects. It frees up that money for them. It creates that relief line for downtown that we need. And most importantly, it gets the city moving while helping the environment at the same time.
네, 그럼 스탠초 의원, 저희 한국 시청자 여러분들께 한국어로 한번 마지막 인사 부탁드리겠습니다.
네, 우리 한국 분들이 저를 믿고 일할 수 있게 기회를 해주셔서 너무 감사드립니다. 캐나다 이민 오셔서 고생 많이 하셨고 우리 자녀들 위해 일 열심히 하고 기도도 해주셔서 너무 감사드립니다. 이제는 우리가 열심히 일해서 부모님들에게 보답하고 자랑스러운 한국인 후세가 되겠습니다. 화이팅!